know that town. Maybe you've only ever driven through it, the kind of place where the main street seems a little too wide for the few cars on it. There's a factory on the outskirts, a giant of rusted steel that stands silent now, a monument to a dead industry. For generations, that factory wasn't just a place of work, it was the town's beating heart, the rhythm of life itself, the promise of a stable future passed down from father to son. That promise now feels like a ghost haunting the landscape. For philosopher John Gray, this isn't just a sad story of economic change, it's the epicenter of a crisis brewing just under the surface of our world. He argues this is the human fallout from an economy that simply evolved past entire communities, treating their existence and their pain as statistically irrelevant, a rounding error on a national report, what experts have called deaths of despair. The staggering rise in suicides and drug overdoses are, in his view, not a collection of individual tragedies. They are the symptoms of this collective sickness. And here's where the story takes its inevitable political turn. Because a feeling that profound, that sense of being utterly left behind, doesn't just stay locked away in those quiet towns. It finds a voice, and it travels all the way to the ballot box. It is no accident that the political maps for events like the Brexit vote and the election of Donald Trump began to glow in the very same places where this societal fever ran hottest. The communities where hope was in the shortest supply and life itself was getting shorter. This is the consequence of a leadership class that looks at a spreadsheet and sees progress, while ignoring the profound human pain right in front of them. Populism, from this perspective, isn't the disease itself, it's the symptom. A raging, chaotic fever that signals a much deeper infection was allowed to fester for years. The political tremors we feel today are just the aftershocks of a way of life that was forgotten, and a pain that was ignored for far too long. You see this strange spectacle playing out all the time in our culture. You see statues of long-dead figures being torn down, or classic works of art and literature being denounced, all in the name of progress and building a more just world. It's presented as a righteous battle, a necessary cleansing of the past to make way for a better future. But you have to start to wonder, are we really watching a society climb to a higher moral ground? Or are we watching a system begin to turn on itself, like a body where the immune system starts attacking its own cells? There's an ancient and frankly unsettling symbol of a serpent coiled in a circle, devouring its own tail. It's a vision of eternal cycles, but also of self-consumption. And it feels eerily like the operating system of the modern world. It's a contradiction that the philosopher John Gray points out with a stark diagnosis. He looks at the very ideology that champions progress and sees that serpent. He describes it like a man who uses a ladder to climb onto a rooftop, only to immediately and frantically kick the ladder away, leaving himself stranded. That ladder represents the deep, almost religious foundations that our ideas of human dignity and liberty grew from. But today, the system seems determined to kick that ladder away. Think of how the champions of individual freedom now often spend their time denouncing the very historical traditions that gave birth to the concept of the individual. Think of a culture that praises critical thinking, only to use that tool to deconstruct every single one of its own foundations until, as Gray grimly notes, nothing remains. When a belief system hollows itself out like that, it grows frantic, desperate for an enemy to give it a sense of purpose. All that energy, which could be used to build something new, ends up just evaporating into this inert gas of moral grandstanding against the distant past. It creates a profound vacuum, and what rushes in to fill it isn't a unifying story of where we're going, but an ideology of constant, anxious negation, a serpent forever chasing and catching its own tail. You know, it's a classic story we've all seen 100 times. Think about Batman and the Joker. What happens when one of them is gone? The other is just incomplete. The hero is often left totally adrift. Without their villain, their whole purpose for putting on the cape just vanishes. We kind of need an enemy to know who we are. And a really unsettling version of this dynamic, I think, is playing out right now, but not in Gotham City, in our own world. The philosopher John Gray points out this strange symbiosis, this bizarre dance, where the high-minded cultural politics on one side and the furious populist backlash on the other aren't really enemies at all. They might just be two heads of the same beast, feeding off each other to survive, defining themselves not by any positive story about who they are, but by who they're against. And it's here that things get really interesting. See, populist movements, as Gray suggests, they offer up the perfect cartoon villain for a political identity that's kind of lost its own way. And in a crucial twist, both sides often end up pointing their fingers at the exact same shadowy force behind all the world's problems, the out-of-touch elite. It's wild when you think about it. For one group, this elite is the face of soulless global capitalism. For the other group, that same elite is the force trying to erase borders and destroy national identity. They're both fighting the same ghost, just from different angles. And by doing that, they accidentally keep fueling each other's crusade in this endless feedback loop of outrage. So when you see voters from the far left and the far right both distrusting the exact same institutions, it's a pretty clear sign that the common ground we all used to stand on has cracked and fallen away. It leaves behind two warring tribes who, in the end, just look in the mirror and see the perfect enemy they always needed. There's this story we've been telling ourselves for decades, a kind of global fairy tale, where every nation is on a journey to the same final destination, a Western-style liberal democracy. It's treated like the final season of a long-running TV show, where all the character arcs have to end in the exact same place. But when you look at the political stage today, with all its bizarre internal arguments and chaos, you have to start wondering, is this really the inevitable march of progress for all humanity? Or is this just a comforting Hollywood script we wrote for ourselves because we liked the ending? Think of a place like Singapore, a nation that rocketed to success by building a society around collective order and stability, a model that looks almost nothing like pure, individualistic free enterprise. Then you have the Scandinavian countries, which built incredibly successful high-trust societies on a foundation of social welfare that would make some titans of industry break out in a nervous sweat. Each one of them found a path to prosperity, yet none of them followed the exact same blueprint. And this gets to a really sharp point, made by the thinker John Gray. He warns that the very idea that one single form of government is the best for every single person on Earth isn't just naive, it's a form of tyranny in its own right. It's the tyranny of a single supposedly perfect answer. And you don't even need to look overseas to see this. Just look at the fiery debates happening in our own backyards. The arguments over the economy, immigration, or the very role of government show that even within one society, there is no secret formula that makes everyone happy. Everyone is screaming that their map is the one true map to Treasure Island, and that everyone else's is a fake that leads off a cliff. All that energy, all that certainty, could be used to solve problems, but instead it just evaporates into this endless culture war. Maybe the real sign of progress isn't about convincing everyone else to use our map. Maybe it's finally having the maturity to admit that different people, with vastly different histories and cultures, might just need different maps altogether. Think for a moment about one of the grandest stories we ever told ourselves. A massive steel behemoth, the pinnacle of modern engineering, slicing through the icy Atlantic. On board, there was an unshakable faith in technology, in progress, in the promise of a future that only went in one direction: up. But we all know how that story ends. It doesn't end with a gentle arrival in New York. It ends with the screech of metal against an iceberg, a force of nature the ship was never truly designed to overcome. That wasn't just a ship that sank, it was a certain kind of faith that went down with it, a fairy tale of endless growth hitting the hard limit of reality. This is the very breakdown the philosopher John Gray points to when he looks at our world today. He argues that the entire operating system of Western capitalism isn't just prone to accidents, it's programmed to fail. The difficult truth is that the decades we spent believing the free market gospel would magically fix the climate haven't gotten us there. The financial implosion of 2008 wasn't some rogue wave. According to this view, it was a preview, the sound of the hull buckling under its own weight, a glimpse of how fast the whole structure shudders when it slams into its own limits. So what happens when the band stops playing and everyone realizes the ship is actually going down? Gray's chilling insight is that when the economic engine dies, something else takes the wheel. The state steps in, not as a gentle guide, but with a heavier, more totalitarian hand to manage the chaos. You don't need a grainy documentary to see this. It's in the quiet hum of expanding surveillance networks, built for our security, or in the grand sweeping government plans designed to manage a green transition. The central myth of a perpetually better tomorrow is gone. And without that comforting story, the logic of liberal capitalism shudders to a halt. leaving us to figure out how to navigate in the dark. Think of that feeling when you're following a guide, a blueprint for how something is supposed to work. You diligently go through step 1, then 2, all the way through part 5, and you feel you're on the verge of a breakthrough, about to reach the final crucial piece of the puzzle. You turn the page, ready for the conclusion for part 6, but it isn't there. There's no explanation, no final chapter. The information just stops. The document simply ends, leaving a void where the conclusion should be. And you have to start wondering, is this just a clerical error, a simple case of a missing file? Or does it point to something more profound about the nature of the systems we navigate? Is it possible that the promise of a part 6 inches is the entire point? A ghost in the machine designed to keep us hooked, to make us feel that the knowledge we possess is permanently incomplete, that the real solution is always just one more step away. It's the modern condition, isn't it? The endless trailer for a movie that will never be released. It brings to mind the glowing briefcase in Pulp Fiction. The contents are never revealed, but the idea of what's inside is powerful enough to drive the entire plot. We're constantly sold on the existence of a definitive conclusion, a final answer that will wrap everything up neatly. But perhaps the game is designed to run forever on the fuel of our search for it. In this state, the 5 solid parts we actually hold in our hands begin to feel worthless, their substance completely overshadowed by the spectacle of the part that's missing. We are left grappling not with the information we were given but with the silence where we were promised a voice.